My mother always told me my life was meaningless because I did not have a husband to validate my existence. On Christmas morning, she decided to punish my independence by dumping my 5 young nieces and nephews on my freezing front porch so my siblings could fly to Aspen for a luxury ski trip. She sped away toward a casino, expecting me to surrender my holiday to clean up her mess, just as I had always done. But as my phone flooded with her frantic voicemails demanding I open my locked front door, she had absolutely no idea I was already 30,000 feet over the Pacific Ocean, sipping a mimosa in a first-class suite. When she finally realized the house was empty and the neighbors were watching 5 crying children in the snow, her arrogance turned into pure terror. Let me tell you exactly how I dismantled my toxic family using nothing but their own entitlement. The air inside the Delta One cabin was perfectly climate controlled and smelled faintly of lavender and expensive leather. I adjusted my seat into a fully reclined position and let the soft hum of the jet engines wash over me. For the first time in 33 years, I was completely inaccessible. Down below, the world was a blur of blue ocean and white clouds stretching endlessly toward Bora Bora. I was thousands of miles away from Atlanta, where a bitter winter storm had just blanketed the city in ice. I took a slow sip of my freshly poured mimosa, letting the crisp champagne and orange juice soothe my throat. I had spent the last 5 years building my real estate software company from a tiny startup into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. I worked 80-hour weeks, sacrificed my sleep, and poured every ounce of my energy into my business. Yes, I was successful, wealthy, and independent. But to my mother, Beatrice, and my siblings Malik and Kiara, none of that mattered. In their eyes, I was just the unmarried sister, the woman who had failed at the only thing that truly mattered, finding a husband and having children. Because I was single, my time was considered worthless, and my home was treated as a free daycare center. I closed my eyes and breathed in the quiet peace of the first-class cabin. The flight attendant, a kind woman named Sarah, brought me a warm towel and asked if I wanted another drink. I smiled and politely declined, feeling a deep sense of contentment. Then the captain announced that we had reached our cruising altitude, and the in-flight wireless internet was now available. I tapped the screen of my phone to connect to the network, intending to download a book to read during the long flight. The moment the connection established, my phone began to vibrate violently in my hand. The notifications poured in like a relentless avalanche. 10 missed calls, 20 missed calls, 47 missed calls. The screen filled with urgent messages from my mother, my brother, my sister, and my sister-in-law. My heart rate remained surprisingly steady. In the past, a barrage of messages from my family would have sent me into a spiral of anxiety. I would have rushed to fix whatever crisis they had created. But today, I just watched the notifications stack up with a cold, clinical detachment. I opened my voicemail and saw 5 new messages, all from my mother. I tapped the first one and pressed the phone to my ear. Beatrice Washington possessed a voice that could curdle milk, and right now it was dripping with self-righteous authority. "Zuri, open the damn door," she demanded in the recording. "I can see your car in the garage, so I know you are home, hiding in there. I left Malik and Kiara's kids on your front porch. They have their luggage and their snacks. Malik and Haley need to catch their flight to Aspen, and Kiara and Preston are going with them. Since you are single and have no real life, it is your duty to watch your nieces and nephews for Christmas. I am heading to the casino in Biloxi for the weekend. Do not call me. Just open the door and take the kids inside." I listened to the message twice, letting the sheer audacity of her words sink into my brain. The temperature in Atlanta was currently hovering around 20 degrees. The wind chill made it feel like single digits. And my mother had simply abandoned 5 children, all under the age of 10, on the concrete porch of my house. She saw my old backup car in the garage and assumed I was inside, deliberately ignoring her. She did not bother to knock or wait for me to answer. She just dumped them like unwanted baggage and drove away to gamble. A familiar anger flared in my chest, but it was quickly swallowed by a profound sense of liberation. I did not have to fix this. I was not there. I calmly navigated to my text messages. The family group chat was a war zone of incoming texts. My sister-in-law, Haley, the white mommy influencer, who built her entire online brand around being a perfect mother, was texting furiously. "Zuri, stop being so selfish and let my babies inside," she wrote. "We are going to miss our flight because you are throwing a childish tantrum." My brother Malik chimed in, calling me a bitter, lonely spinster who was jealous of their happy marriages. My younger sister Kiara sent voice notes complaining that her husband Preston was getting angry about the delay. Not a single one of them asked if I was okay or if I was even home. They simply demanded that I fulfill my designated role as the family servant. I took another sip of my mimosa, savoring the sweet citrus flavor. I opened my contacts and dialed my mother's number. She answered on the very first ring, her voice shrill and echoing with background road noise. "Zuri, you ungrateful little brat!" Beatrice screamed into the phone. "The kids are freezing on the porch. Haley is crying because she thinks she is going to miss her luxury ski trip. Open your front door right this second before I drive back there and break it down myself." I kept my voice completely level and soft, deliberately contrasting her hysterical screaming. "Mom, I told you 2 months ago that I would not be in Atlanta for Christmas." I sent an email, a text message, and a calendar invite stating very clearly that I was going on vacation and my house would be empty. There was a brief pause on the line, but her arrogance quickly overrode any logic. "Do not let me," Beatrice snapped. "Your car is in the garage. I saw it with my own eyes. You are just being spiteful because you have no husband to spend the holidays with. You are trying to ruin your brother and sister's perfect Christmas because you are miserable. Stop playing games and let your nieces and nephews inside." "Mom," I said, speaking very slowly and clearly, so there could be no misunderstanding. "I took an Uber to the airport early this morning. The car in the garage is my old sedan. I am currently 30,000 feet in the air flying over the Pacific Ocean on a direct flight to Bora Bora. I will not be back in the United States for 2 weeks. My house is locked, the alarm is set, and nobody is inside." The silence that followed was absolute. I could practically hear the gears grinding in her head as she tried to process the reality of my words. The background noise of her car engine seemed to grow louder in the quiet. "What do you mean you are on a plane?" She finally stammered, her voice losing its authoritative edge and dropping into a register of genuine panic. "Zuri, tell me you are joking. Tell me you are inside that house." "I am not joking, Mom," I replied, tracing the rim of my glass with my finger. "You just left 5 young children alone on a freezing porch in 20-degree weather outside a completely vacant house. I believe the police and Child Protective Services define that as child abandonment. If any of those neighbors see them crying in the snow, they will call the authorities." I could hear the sudden screech of tires through the phone as Beatrice slammed on her brakes. The sharp sound of a horn blaring indicated she had abruptly swerved on the highway. "Oh my God," she breathed, the self-righteous matriarch completely gone now, replaced by a terrified old woman. "Oh my God, Zuri, you have to call someone. Call your neighbors. Call a locksmith. You have to get them inside. I am an hour away on the interstate. I cannot turn around right now, the traffic is too heavy." "Why is that my problem?" I asked, leaning my head back against the soft leather seat. "You created this situation by treating me like an unpaid employee. You assumed you could dictate my life because you do not respect my independence. You abandoned your grandchildren to go play slot machines. You need to figure out how to fix it because I am going to turn off my wireless connection and take a nap." Before Beatrice could respond, there was a chaotic shuffling sound on the other end of the line. Voices shouted in the background, and the phone was snatched away. Suddenly, the deep, arrogant voice of my white brother-in-law Preston boomed through the speaker. Preston worked in finance and carried himself with a sickening superiority complex, always acting as if his presence in our black family was some sort of charitable gift. He constantly belittled my business and treated my sister Kiara like a trophy. "Listen to me, you arrogant nobody," Preston growled into the phone. "You are going to call your security company and unlock that front door remotely right now. You are going to let our kids inside to wait where it is warm. Do you have any idea how much money I spent on these non-refundable first-class tickets to Aspen? Do you know who I am? If we miss our flight because of your petty little stunt, I will personally sue you for the cost of the trip and emotional distress. I will make sure your pathetic little software company is ruined. Do not mess with me, Zuri." I listened to a white man threaten me, demand my labor, and insult the multi-million-dollar company I had built from nothing, all while his children were freezing on my porch because of his own negligence. The sheer entitlement was breathtaking. I did not raise my voice. I did not match his anger. I simply smiled at the beautiful blue ocean far below me. "Preston," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper of pure venom, "if you ever speak to me like that again, I will ensure you never work in finance again. You have exactly 30 minutes to rescue your children from my property before the automated security cameras alert the local precinct to a trespassing and child neglect incident. Have a wonderful trip to Aspen." I pressed the red button to end the call. I took a deep breath, letting the silence of the airplane cabin wrap around me. For years I had swallowed their insults. For years I had paid their bills, quietly tolerated their disrespect, and allowed them to use my home as a dumping ground. They believed I was weak because I chose peace over conflict. They believed my lack of a husband made me a failure. They had no idea that behind my quiet demeanor, I had amassed enough wealth, power, and legal leverage to dismantle their entire lives. And as I set my phone face down on the tray table, I knew this was only the beginning of their nightmare. I stared at the blank screen of my phone, imagining the absolute chaos unfolding on the icy streets of Atlanta. My front porch was expansive, covered in gray slate tiles that turned into blocks of ice during winter storms. There was no shelter from the biting wind out there. I pictured my oldest nephew, Marcus, who was only 9 years old, trying to keep his 4 younger cousins warm while they huddled together among their hastily packed duffel bags. The thought of the children's suffering caused a brief twinge of guilt in my chest, but I quickly, ruthlessly pushed it down. This was not my fault. This was the direct result of Haley and Kiara prioritizing a luxury ski resort over the safety and well-being of their own offspring. It was the result of Malik and Preston believing they were entitled to my time and resources without ever having to ask for permission. I thought back to this previous Christmas, when I had hosted the entire family. I spent 3 days cooking a massive feast, buying expensive gifts for every single child, and decorating the house to look like a holiday magazine spread. When they arrived, Preston had immediately complained about the brand of scotch I purchased, while Haley spent the entire evening filming content for her Instagram page, forcing her children to pose in front of my fireplace while completely ignoring me. At the end of the night, Beatrice had pulled me aside into the kitchen, not to thank me, but to deliver a harsh lecture. She told me the dinner was adequate, but pointed out that a woman my age should be cooking for a husband, not desperately trying to buy the affection of her siblings. She actually looked around my beautifully renovated kitchen and sighed, saying it was such a shame that a house this big was wasted on a woman who would die alone. That was the exact moment the emotional cord connecting me to my family finally snapped. I realized that no amount of financial success, no level of generosity, and no degree of accommodation would ever make them respect me. To them, my wealth was merely a resource to be exploited, and my single status was a weapon they could use to keep me subservient. I had spent the last 12 months quietly preparing for this exact day. I structured my investments, locked down my assets, and untangled myself from their messy financial lives. I was no longer the reliable doormat. I was a phantom sitting in the sky, watching them fall into a trap they had built with their own hands. The flight attendant walked down the aisle, checking on the passengers. She offered me a warm smile and asked if I cared for a refill. I handed her my empty glass and requested a glass of sparkling water instead. My mind was sharp, focused, and calculating the next moves in this intricate game of chess. I knew Preston was furious, not because of his children, but because his fragile ego could not handle being told no by a black woman he considered beneath him. I knew my mother was panicking because her entire identity was built on the illusion of control. And I knew Haley was probably already trying to figure out how to spin this disaster into a victim narrative for her online followers. They thought they were dealing with the old Zuri, the Zuri who would cry and apologize just to keep the peace. The Zuri who would remotely unlock the door and hire a premium babysitting service to watch the kids so her brothers could go skiing. But that woman no longer existed. In her place was a chief executive officer who managed hundreds of employees, negotiated million-dollar contracts, and ruthlessly eliminated liabilities from her life. and my family had just officially become a liability. I picked up my phone one more time before putting it away. The screen lit up with another dozen messages. The group chat was exploding with a mixture of terror and rage. I did not open them. I did not need to read their desperate attempts to regain control of a situation that had already slipped through their fingers. The plane hit a patch of mild turbulence, gently rocking my seat, but I felt nothing but perfect, unwavering stability. I closed my eyes, pulled a soft cashmere blanket over my legs, and drifted into the most peaceful sleep I had experienced in my entire life, leaving them to face the freezing consequences of their own choices. The soft hum of the jet engines should have been my lullaby, but my peace was violently interrupted. My phone resting on the polished wood of my tray table lit up with a blinding intensity. I had barely closed my eyes when the relentless vibration started again, rattling the expensive crystal glass sitting next to it. I looked down and watched the screen flood with a continuous stream of green notification bubbles. They had created a brand new group chat. The title of the chat was simply an angry red face emoji. I sighed and picked up the device, feeling the cool metal against my palm. The sheer volume of messages pouring in was staggering even for them. It was a digital firing squad, orchestrated by the very people who shared my blood and the people who married into it. I tapped the screen to open the thread and was immediately met with a wall of pure vitriol. Malik was the first to unleash his fury. My older brother had always possessed a terrifying temper, especially when his authority was questioned. He typed in rapid succession, calling me a bitter, lonely spinster who was completely jealous of the beautiful families they had built. He said my wealth meant nothing if I had no one to share it with, and that my actions today proved I was destined to die alone. Kiara, my younger sister, followed right behind him, echoing his cruelty. She called me an unnatural woman, a cold-hearted witch who hated children, because I could not find a man to give me my own. She typed paragraph after paragraph detailing how she was shivering in the driveway, trying to keep her 3 babies warm while I selfishly abandoned my blood for a meaningless vacation. They weaponized my single status, just as they always did, using it as the ultimate insult to deflect from their own monumental failures as parents. Then came Preston. My white brother-in-law typed with the distinct arrogance of a man who believed the world owed him everything. He did not care about the freezing children. He only cared about his bruised ego and his disrupted schedule. He demanded that I stop acting like an emotional teenager and fix the problem immediately. He told me I was embarrassing myself, and that if I had any sense of family values, I would have hired a professional service to wait at my house to receive his children, since I was apparently too busy taking a pathetic solo trip. He actually typed the words that I needed to remember my place in the family hierarchy. He reminded me that he was a senior vice president in finance and that my behavior was unacceptable for someone who claimed to be a professional. Haley, my sister-in-law, was the most frantic of them all. Her messages were a chaotic mix of insults and demands. She was a lifestyle influencer on social media who spent her entire existence curating a fake reality of perfect motherhood. Her texts revealed her true colors. She called me a psycho and a monster. She demanded to know how I could be so cruel to her perfect angels. She complained that the freezing wind was ruining her hair and that she was going to miss her first-class flight to Aspen. She said I was intentionally sabotaging her brand because I was a miserable woman who had nothing going for her except a boring desk job. Reading their vicious words, I did not feel the familiar sting of rejection. I did not feel the urge to cry or defend myself. Instead, I felt a profound cold clarity wash over me. Their insults were not new. They were just louder versions of the disrespect I had endured for the last 10 years. As I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, my mind drifted back to the launch day of my software company. It was the most important day of my professional life. I had spent 2 years writing the code, building the architecture, and securing the initial seed funding for my real estate management platform. I had rented a beautiful event space in downtown Atlanta to celebrate the launch with potential investors and industry leaders. I had purchased a stunning white suit for the occasion, and I had invited my entire family, hoping they would finally be proud of me. Instead, on the very morning of my company launch, Haley had driven up to my apartment and unbuckled her two toddlers from their car seats. She walked right through my front door, handed me a diaper bag, and announced she had a last-minute brand collaboration photo shoot that she simply could not miss. When I told her I had my launch event in 3 hours and could not watch her children, she had rolled her eyes. She told me my little tech party could wait, but her sponsor was paying her real money. She left the kids in my living room and drove away. I spent the morning of my launch wiping spit up off my clothes and trying to keep two toddlers from destroying my home. I missed my own opening presentation. My lead developer had to speak in my place. When my family finally returned that evening, nobody apologized. Malik told me I should be grateful for the practice since I was getting older and my biological clock was ticking. The disrespect did not stop there. I remembered the Thanksgiving dinner 2 years later when my company had just secured its first major enterprise client. I was so excited to share the news at the table. I proudly announced that my software was now being used by 3 of the largest property management firms in the Southeast. I expected a toast, or maybe a simple congratulations. Instead, Preston had laughed out loud. He swirled the expensive scotch I had purchased for him and looked at me with a condescending smirk. He told the entire table that it was cute I had a little coding hobby for women. He said the tech world was a playground for real men with real capital and that I should probably sell my little app before the big boys crushed me. He advised me to take whatever pennies I could get and invest them into a good mutual fund, which he generously offered to manage for a modest fee. My mother had nodded in agreement, telling me to listen to Preston because he was a successful provider and knew how the real world worked. I had swallowed my pride that day. I had smiled and passed the mashed potatoes, burying my fury deep inside my chest. I had let them believe they were superior because I thought keeping the peace was more important than demanding respect. But keeping the peace had only taught them that they could abuse me without consequences. They believed my silence was submission. They had no idea that my cute little coding hobby was currently generating more revenue in a single month than Preston and Malik made in an entire year combined. They had no idea that the woman they were calling a failure was sitting on a mountain of wealth that could buy and sell their entire lives 10 times over. A new message popped up on my screen, pulling me back to the present moment. It was from Haley. The text was long and filled with aggressive demands. "Zuri, you listen to me right now," she wrote. "The boarding gates for our flight to Aspen close in exactly 2 hours. We are stuck in your driveway trying to figure out what to do with these kids because you decided to be a selfish monster. These tickets cost $15,000 and they are completely non-refundable. If we miss this flight because of your little stunt, I am making you pay for the tickets. I will take you to small claims court. I will sue you for every penny you have. You owe us $15,000 right now. Send it through a wire transfer immediately to compensate for ruining our family Christmas." I stared at the demand for $15,000. Haley genuinely believed she could extort money from me to cover the cost of a luxury vacation she was trying to take while abandoning her children. She believed I would simply open my bank app and transfer the funds out of guilt or fear. She thought her threats of legal action would intimidate me. I looked at the long thread of insults, the racial microaggressions from Preston, the cruel jabs from my siblings, and the sheer delusion of my sister-in-law. I did not write a paragraph defending myself. I did not engage with their legal threats. I did not explain that a judge would laugh her out of court for trying to sue the sister she just dumped her kids on. I simply tapped the emoji keyboard, selected the classic thumbs up symbol, and hit send. A single thumbs up, a universal symbol of complete and utter unbothered dismissal. I sent it into the chat and watched the little bubble appear at the bottom of the screen. The reaction was instantaneous. I could almost feel the heat of their rage radiating through the digital connection. Malik immediately typed that I was a dead woman to him. Kiara sent a voice note of herself screaming into the phone, calling me a sociopath. Preston typed a long string of profanities threatening to come to my house and break the windows. I simply watched the messages scroll by, feeling a profound sense of calm. I had given them exactly what they deserved, which was absolutely nothing. I turned my phone on silent, intending to finally get some sleep. I took a deep breath of the filtered cabin air and closed my eyes, letting the gentle vibration of the airplane soothe my tired muscles. But 5 minutes later, my phone lit up, brightly illuminating the darkened space around me. It was not a text message from my family. It was an automated notification from Instagram. I had turned on post notifications for Haley years ago to keep track of her erratic online behavior. The notification read that Haley Washington had just started a live broadcast. My eyes opened wide. I knew Haley was desperate for attention and obsessed with her public image. But I did not think she was foolish enough to take a private family dispute to her 500,000 followers. I was wrong. I tapped the notification and the Instagram application opened. The screen loaded, and there was Haley sitting in the passenger seat of Malik's luxury sport utility vehicle. The heater must have been blasting because her face was flushed, and her blonde hair was perfectly tousled to look like she had been through a harrowing ordeal. She was holding the phone close to her face and tears were streaming down her cheeks. The tears looked incredibly genuine. She had always been an excellent actress. The viewer count at the top of the screen was climbing rapidly, ticking past 10,000, then 20,000, then 50,000 people tuning in to watch her emotional breakdown. "You guys?" Haley sobbed into the camera, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her designer winter coat. "I usually only share the positive parts of my life with you. But right now, I am experiencing a mother's worst nightmare, and I just need your prayers. My husband and I were supposed to be leaving for our family ski trip today. We made arrangements for my sister-in-law Zuri to watch our innocent babies. She promised us she would be home. She promised us they would have a magical Christmas. But when we dropped them off, she locked the doors. She turned off all the lights and refused to let them inside." Haley paused for dramatic effect, letting out a shaky breath, while the comments section of the live video moved so fast it was just a blur of angry text. "My beautiful innocent babies were left out in the freezing snow." Haley cried, touching her chest, as if she were in physical pain. "My cruel child-hating sister-in-law literally left them to freeze on her porch, just because she is a bitter woman who hates that we have a happy family. We had to cancel our entire trip to rescue our children. I have never seen such pure evil in my entire life. Please pray for my family, guys. Please send love to my babies who are so traumatized by their own aunt." I watched the broadcast with a mixture of shock and sheer morbid fascination. Haley had completely fabricated the entire narrative. She painted herself as the devoted mother who had made responsible childcare arrangements only to be betrayed by a malicious monster. She deliberately omitted the fact that she abandoned them without confirming I was home. She omitted the fact that they drove away and expected me to just deal with it. She weaponized her massive platform of dedicated followers and aimed them directly at me. Before Haley even ended the live broadcast, the consequences of her rogue actions began to manifest. My phone started vibrating again, but it was no longer my family. I had a public business profile on Instagram linked to my software company. My notification feed suddenly turned into a waterfall of pure hatred. I was receiving hundreds of direct messages per second. Strangers from all over the world were invading my digital space. They called me a child abuser. They called me a monster. They said I deserved to be locked in a freezer. The messages quickly escalated from insults to specific graphic death threats. People were saying they were going to find my house and burn it down. They were posting my company's public email address in the comment section and urging their followers to leave fake one-star reviews to destroy my business. Haley had unleashed a digital mob of 500,000 angry mothers who believed I had tortured innocent children on Christmas Eve. She thought she had won. She thought she had effectively destroyed my reputation and my livelihood as punishment for ruining her ski trip. She believed her tears and her white woman victimhood would completely obliterate my life. I sat in my first-class seat staring at the endless stream of death threats flooding my phone. The situation had escalated far beyond a petty family dispute. It was now a direct attack on my safety, my brand, and the multi-million-dollar empire I had built. I locked my phone and took a long, slow breath. Haley wanted to play a public game of destruction. She wanted to use technology to ruin my life. But she had forgotten one very crucial detail. I was the one who built technology for a living, and I had the ultimate counterstrike waiting quietly in the cloud. The notification badge on my email application shifted from a small red circle to a rapidly expanding number. It was not just the angry mothers from the internet anymore. My primary business account was receiving automated alerts from the server. Investors were starting to notice the digital firestorm. A partner from a venture capital firm I had been courting for my Series B funding sent a highly guarded message asking for an urgent phone call regarding a public relations crisis. Another angel investor forwarded a screenshot of Haley crying on her live feed, asking if my company was about to face a legal investigation for child endangerment. The sheer velocity of the cancellation was fascinating to watch from a purely analytical perspective. Haley had mobilized her entire following in less than 20 minutes. She knew exactly which psychological triggers to pull to make her audience blind with maternal rage. Her followers did not care about facts or context. They did not care about the logistical impossibility of me locking children out of a house while I was sitting on an airplane halfway across the world. They only saw a blonde weeping mother holding a phone and decided that the black sister-in-law was the ultimate villain. I watched the investor emails stack up next to the death threats and felt a profound quiet settle over my mind. They expected me to issue a groveling public apology. They expected me to beg for mercy and transfer whatever funds Haley demanded just to make the nightmare stop. The internet mob was demanding my immediate termination from my own company. People were finding my personal address and posting it in public forums, encouraging locals to go to my property and rescue the frozen children themselves. The level of mass hysteria Haley managed to generate was a testament to how easily a false narrative could destroy a life if left unchecked. But I refused to panic. I took a slow breath of the recycled cabin air and opened my secure home management application instead. I had personally designed the security architecture for my property in Atlanta. It was not a standard off-the-shelf alarm system that could be easily bypassed. It was a comprehensive web of high-definition cameras, motion sensors, and environmental monitors, all linked to a private server I controlled from my laptop or phone. The interface loaded smoothly on my tablet despite the satellite internet connection over the Pacific Ocean. I navigated past the interior environmental controls and selected the external surveillance archives. I pulled up the front porch camera and the driveway wide-angle lens. The application asked for my decryption key, and I typed it in, watching as the timeline of the morning materialized on my screen. I scrolled back to the exact window of time when my mother claimed she was desperately trying to get my attention. The timestamp read 8:45 in the morning. The temperature overlay showed it was a brutal 19 degrees outside, with wind gusts that knocked the patio chairs against the railing. I hit play and watched the high-definition footage render in perfect clarity. I watched my own family orchestrate a scenario that could have resulted in a tragedy, all for the sake of a ski trip. The video started with my mother pulling her sedan into my driveway. Her car jerked to a stop right in front of the steps. The camera resolution was so crisp I could see the angry puff of exhaust pluming in the freezing air. Beatrice stepped out of the vehicle wearing a heavy wool coat and instantly started shivering. She walked around to the passenger doors and yanked them open. One by one, she began pulling my nieces and nephews out of the back seat. My oldest nephew, Marcus, tumbled out first, looking confused and rubbing his arms against the cold. The younger ones followed, wearing winter jackets that were nowhere near thick enough for the severe weather drop that had hit the city overnight. Beatrice did not look at the camera. She did not walk up to the door to knock. She did not peek through the front windows to see if I was awake. She simply grabbed 5 small duffel bags from her trunk and tossed them onto the icy slate tiles of my porch. The youngest girl started crying the moment her feet hit the frozen ground, but my mother did not even bend down to comfort her. She just pointed a finger at the door, said something sharp that the audio picked up as a muffled command to wait, and got right back into her car. She threw the vehicle into reverse and sped out of the driveway without a single backward glance. But that was not the most damning part of the footage. I switched the view to the wide-angle camera pointing toward the street and zoomed in on the opposite side of the road. Parked partially behind a large oak tree was a massive black luxury sport utility vehicle. It was Malik and Haley. They had been sitting there the entire time. I watched the 4K video play out as my mother abandoned their children on my porch. Malik was in the driver's seat and Haley was in the passenger seat holding her phone up. I enhanced the image focusing directly on the windshield of their vehicle. They were not panicking. They were not worried about the freezing temperature. Haley was laughing. She was literally laughing and filming my mother driving away. They waited in their heated car, watching their own children shiver on my porch, just to make sure Beatrice successfully dumped them before they headed to the airport for their luxury vacation. Haley orchestrated the entire scenario. She knew I was not answering the door. She watched her youngest daughter cry in the snow and chose to pull out her phone to record a manipulative video instead of stepping out of her warm car to protect her own child. The sheer sociopathic nature of the setup was breathtaking. They were perfectly willing to use their children as pawns in a twisted game to punish me for setting a boundary. They thought they could weaponize my property and my reputation simultaneously. I paused the footage and took a high-resolution screenshot of my mother peeling out of the driveway while the kids huddled on the porch. I took a second screenshot zooming in perfectly on Malik and Haley, sitting in their warm vehicle across the street, watching it happen. I downloaded the short video clip, compressing it so it would send quickly over the airplane network. I opened the family group chat, which was still buzzing with messages from Kiara and Preston, demanding that I wire them compensation money for their ruined holiday. They were still insisting that I was the villain of this story. I ignored their noise and typed a single message directed solely at my sister-in-law. I told Haley she had exactly 60 seconds to take down her Instagram live video and issue a written retraction to her followers. I told her that if the video was not completely scrubbed from the internet in 1 minute, I would forward the high-definition security footage directly to the Atlanta Police Department. I added that I would also copy Child Protective Services and every single brand sponsor she currently worked with. I attached the 2 screenshots and the video file to the message and hit send. I did not add any empty threats or emotional language. I laid out the exact consequences of her actions and gave her a strict deadline. I sat back and watched the read receipts pop up at the bottom of the group chat. Malik read it. Kiara read it. Preston read it. Haley read it. The digital silence that followed was heavy and immediate. The relentless stream of incoming text messages stopped completely. I opened Instagram on a separate tab and refreshed Haley's page. I watched in real time as the live broadcast abruptly ended. I refreshed the page again and saw that her previous 3 posts complaining about her family drama had vanished. The comments were disabled. She was scrubbing her entire digital footprint in sheer panic. The power dynamic had shifted in the span of 30 seconds. She realized that her fake victim narrative could not survive against hard, unedited video evidence of her own child endangerment. She knew that if Child Protective Services saw a video of her laughing in a warm car while her children froze on a porch, her influencer career would be permanently destroyed and she might actually lose custody. She was a coward who folded the moment real consequences were presented. I closed the application feeling a profound sense of satisfaction. The investor emails could wait. I had the evidence to clear my name whenever I chose to use it, and the crisis was already dying down as Haley desperately tried to erase her tracks. I took a deep breath of the filtered cabin air and looked out the window at the endless blue horizon. Then my phone began to vibrate with an incoming call. The caller identification displayed Preston's name. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but my curiosity about his desperation won. I swiped the screen to answer and brought the phone to my ear, remaining completely silent. Preston did not wait for a greeting. His voice came through the speaker in a low, furious hiss. He was no longer shouting, but the quiet rage in his tone was far more toxic. He told me I was a sick and twisted individual for installing surveillance cameras to spy on my own family. He completely ignored the fact that he and his relatives had abandoned young children in a winter storm. Instead, he twisted the narrative to make my security system the real crime. He said my behavior was exactly why I was alone in life and why nobody could stand being around me. He said I had no concept of loyalty or family values and that I was tearing them apart because I was empty inside. Then he crossed a line that fundamentally altered the trajectory of our relationship forever. Preston leaned fully into his racial superiority complex, a trait he usually kept hidden behind passive-aggressive corporate speak. He told me that people like me never understood how the real world worked. He said I was an arrogant black woman who thought a little bit of tech money made me untouchable, but I was still just a diversity quota in a white man industry. He told me I needed to learn respect and understand my place in the grand scheme of things. He said my little blackmail stunt with the video was cute, but it was nothing compared to the power he wielded. He let out a short, bitter laugh and dropped what he believed was the ultimate bomb. He told me he had spent the last hour making phone calls while they were stuck in traffic turning back from the airport. He proudly announced that he personally knew the senior partner at the venture capital firm leading my Series B funding round. He said he had already planted a seed of doubt about my mental stability and ethical practices with his industry connections. He promised me that by the time I landed from my pathetic little solo vacation, my funding would be permanently pulled. He swore he would make sure my company was entirely defunded and that I would lose my business, my reputation, and everything I had built by tomorrow morning. He told me to enjoy my flight because it would be the last luxury I could ever afford. I listened to his entire racist tirade without making a single sound, allowing him to expose the absolute darkest corners of his character before the call disconnected. But he did not disconnect right away. Preston was a man who loved the sound of his own voice too much to simply hang up after delivering a threat. He needed to ensure I understood the exact mechanics of the destruction he was planning for me. He lowered his voice to a terrifying calm and began to detail his position at Vanguard Capital. He explained that Vanguard was the primary backer for the syndicate handling my upcoming Series B funding round. He laughed softly and told me that venture capital was a very small, very exclusive club dominated by men who looked exactly like him. He said that all it would take was one phone call to his managing director to flag my company as a high-risk, volatile investment. He promised to fabricate a story about my erratic personal behavior and unreliability. He told me that in his world perception was reality, and a black female founder was already fighting an uphill battle. He said he would simply clip my wings before I even got off the ground, and no other reputable firm in the country would touch my software platform after Vanguard blacklisted me. He spoke with such profound confidence, completely oblivious to the reality of who he was actually speaking to. After laying out his elaborate plan for my professional ruin, Preston offered me what he called a generous way out. He said he was a reasonable man who understood the value of a quick settlement. He demanded $50,000. He did not ask for it. He commanded it as if he were collecting a debt I rightfully owed him. He broke down the cost of the ruined Aspen vacation, the non-refundable first-class tickets, the luxury cabin rental, and added a premium for the severe emotional distress I had caused his perfect family on Christmas Day. He told me to consider it a very cheap consulting fee to keep my business alive. He gave me exactly 2 hours to wire the funds to his personal offshore account before he made the call to his partners. He said if I transferred the money immediately, he would graciously forgive my child, abandonment stunt, and smooth things over with the family. The sheer audacity of him trying to extort money from me while standing in my driveway was almost impressive. In the background of the call, I could hear the chaotic sounds of my mother moving closer to the phone. Beatrice grabbed the device and her voice came through trembling with a mixture of fear and misplaced authority. She begged me to just send Preston the money. She told me that Preston was a powerful white man in the finance industry and that I was being foolish for trying to stand up to him. She said I needed to make peace with the family and that $50,000 was a small price to pay to keep a man like Preston from destroying my life. She actually told me to apologize to him and beg for his forgiveness because my stubborn independence was going to leave me bankrupt and alone. She reminded me that he was the only successful man in our family circle and that we needed to protect his image at all costs. She reinforced every toxic dynamic she had ever created, sacrificing her own daughter to appease the ego of an arrogant son-in-law just to maintain the illusion of family harmony. She begged me to just be a good girl and open my wallet to save their holiday. I did not say a single word in response to her pleading. I simply pressed the red end call button on my screen and slid the phone into my designer tote bag. I closed my eyes and let the silence wash over me again as the pilot announced our final descent into French Polynesia. The contrast between the freezing toxic chaos I had just muted in Atlanta and the warm tropical paradise waiting for me outside my window was almost poetic. I had spent years trying to earn their respect through quiet generosity and endless patience. I had convinced myself that if I just worked hard enough and provided enough support, they would eventually see my value. But listening to Preston extort me, while my mother begged me to submit to his abuse, shattered any remaining illusion I held about my family. They did not want a daughter or a sister. They wanted a compliant resource. When the plane finally touched down on the remote airstrip, the transition was beautifully seamless. I was escorted by a private concierge through a dedicated customs line, bypassing the crowded terminal entirely. They ushered me onto a sleek luxury speedboat that cut across the crystal-clear turquoise water toward my exclusive resort. The warm tropical breeze carried the scent of blooming tiare flowers and sea salt, completely erasing the lingering tension in my shoulders. The deep blue of the ocean sparkled under the mid-afternoon sun, offering a stark visual contrast to the icy sleet currently trapping my relatives in a cramped vehicle back home. I stepped off the boat onto the polished wooden arrival dock and was greeted by the resort staff, who placed a fresh flower lei around my neck and handed me a chilled lavender-scented towel. They drove me in a quiet electric cart down a long meandering boardwalk that stretched far out over the pristine lagoon. My overwater bungalow was a masterpiece of private luxury, positioned at the very end of the pier for maximum seclusion. I walked inside, taking in the glass-bottom floors that revealed the vibrant marine life swimming directly beneath the living room. I slid open the massive folding doors that led to my private deck overlooking the endless expanse of the Pacific Ocean. There was a plunge pool built into the deck and a set of wooden stairs leading straight down into the warm lagoon. It was the absolute antithesis of a frozen concrete porch in Georgia. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the pure, unadulterated freedom of being entirely out of their reach. I poured myself a glass of cold water from the minibar and walked out onto the sun-drenched deck, setting up my mobile command center at a beautiful teakwood table. I opened my sleek silver laptop and connected to the high-speed secure satellite network the resort provided specifically for its elite corporate guests. The gentle sound of the waves lapping against the wooden stilts beneath me provided the perfect calming soundtrack for the corporate execution I was about to initiate. Preston thought he was a financial predator, holding a knife to the throat of my fragile little startup. He believed my company was still a struggling independent venture, desperate for his Series B capital to stay afloat. He believed he held the keys to my entire future because that was the narrative I had allowed my family to believe. His intelligence was severely outdated, and his arrogance had blinded him to the basic principles of due diligence. What nobody in my family knew, not even my mother, who claimed to know everything about everyone, was that my cute coding hobby had been quietly acquired by a massive global tech conglomerate 3 months ago. The acquisition was structured meticulously to keep my name out of the initial press releases, allowing me to maintain full operational control as the chief executive officer while cashing out a massive 9-figure sum. I was no longer a struggling founder begging for venture capital scraps from men who looked down on me. I was a verified decamillionaire with a diversified portfolio that spanned multiple continents and industries. I had more liquid capital sitting in high-yield accounts than Preston's entire division managed in a fiscal year. I opened my encrypted financial dashboard and authenticated my identity through a dual biometric security scan. The screen loaded seamlessly, displaying a complex web of holding companies, offshore trusts, and silent partnerships I had built with my wealth management team to protect my assets from the exact type of extortion my family was currently attempting. I navigated to the portfolio of my primary holding firm, the one I specifically used to invest the bulk of my acquisition payout. I clicked on the Equity Distribution tab and scrolled down to the banking and finance sector. There, sitting plainly on my high-resolution screen, was the irrefutable data that would end Preston forever. My holding company was not just a successful entity floating in the background of the stock market. Through a series of aggressive strategic investments brokered by my wealth managers, my holding company was actually the second largest silent shareholder of Vanguard Capital itself. I owned a massive percentage of the very firm Preston was threatening to use against me. He was merely a mid-level senior vice president who thought his title made him a king. I was quite literally one of his ultimate bosses. I possessed the voting power to demand a restructuring of the board of directors, let alone demand the immediate termination of a single arrogant employee who was violating corporate ethics. I opened a new secure email draft and addressed it directly to the chief executive officer of Vanguard Capital, a man named Richard, whom I had dined with in New York just 2 weeks prior to discuss long-term strategic growth. But I was not just going to send a casual email complaining about an employee making racist threats and attempting to extort $50,000 from a major shareholder. Preston had demanded total destruction, and I was going to deliver it with surgical precision. I wanted to leave no room for quiet resignations or generous severance packages. I wanted a public catastrophic professional execution. I minimized the email draft and opened a hidden encrypted folder on my hard drive. This folder contained information forwarded to me by a brilliant forensic accountant I had hired on retainer months ago. I had asked the accountant to look into Preston when he first started bragging about his massive, unaccounted bonuses at family dinners, while simultaneously asking Malik for short-term loans. The accountant had easily traced Preston's careless digital footprint, revealing a stunning pattern of financial crimes. I attached a comprehensive 60-page dossier of irrefutable proof, showing that Preston had been systematically embezzling client funds through a complex web of shell accounts to pay for his lavish lifestyle. The documentation showed exactly how he funded his luxury vehicles, his country club memberships, and specifically the $15,000 non-refundable tickets for the Aspen ski trip he was currently crying about. I drafted the email with cold professional detachment, detailing his financial crimes, his attempt to extort $50,000 from a private citizen, and his use of the Vanguard company name to issue racially motivated threats against a female founder. I attached the audio recording of the phone call, which my security software had automatically archived. I clearly stated that as the second largest shareholder, I expected immediate termination and full cooperation with federal authorities regarding the embezzlement. I took a moment to reflect on the sheer irony of the situation. Preston had spent years sitting at my dining room table, eating the food I purchased, and drinking the wine I poured, all while looking down his nose at me. He had convinced my sister Kiara that his white-collar job made him inherently superior to the rest of us, and my mother had eagerly bought into that exact same narrative. They had all bowed down to the illusion of his wealth while completely ignoring the reality of mine. He thought he could crush me with a single phone call because he could not fathom a world where I held more power than he did. He was about to learn the most painful lesson of his entire life, and he was going to learn it while standing in a freezing driveway holding a worthless plane ticket he bought with stolen money. I checked my internet connection one last time to ensure the large attachment files had fully uploaded to the secure server. The progress bar hit 100%, turning solid green across my screen. I took one final sip of my sparkling water, feeling the cool condensation on the outside of the glass. I dragged the mouse pointer directly over the send icon. The notification chime on my laptop chimed softly, blending perfectly with the sound of the ocean breeze rustling the palm leaves outside my bungalow. I opened the email from Apex Holdings, confirming that the formal 30-day notice of eviction had been successfully dispatched to Malik and Haley email addresses. A physical copy would be posted on the front door of the Buckhead mansion by a process server first thing tomorrow morning. I closed the laptop screen, feeling a deep, satisfying click. My breathing was slow and steady. The frantic, panicked energy that usually accompanied any interaction with my family was completely absent. I had severed the financial arteries that kept their parasitic behavior alive. Preston was destroyed. Malik was displaced. My mother was exposed. All that remained was to let them face the terrifying reality of their own incompetence. I spent the rest of Christmas Day exactly as I had planned. I ordered a private dinner spread consisting of fresh local seafood and grilled vegetables, which the resort staff delivered directly to my deck. I poured a glass of crisp white wine and watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of purple and gold. I did not look at my phone. I did not check Instagram to see if Haley had posted another crying video. I did not care if they were spending their holiday sleeping on the floor of the airport terminal or crammed into my modest living room. I simply existed in my own space, enjoying the luxurious peace that my hard work had afforded me. But a family built on entitlement does not accept defeat quietly. When they realize they can no longer manipulate you through guilt, they inevitably pivot to aggression. When I finally checked my phone the next morning, the lock screen was an absolute battlefield of notifications. There were over 100 missed calls and a continuous stream of unhinged text messages. The tone had shifted dramatically from arrogant threats to sheer desperate rage. Preston had been formally charged and released on bail, pending a federal investigation, and Vanguard had publicly distanced themselves from his actions. Malik and Haley had received the eviction notice and realized I was completely serious about stripping away their fake mansion. They were no longer trying to negotiate. They were trying to destroy me. Malik sent texts threatening to come to my corporate office and physically assault me. Kiara left voice notes sobbing hysterically, claiming I had ruined her children's lives and that she wished I was dead. Preston was a disgraced criminal. Malik and Haley were facing eviction and a CPS investigation. My mother was facing charges for filing a false police report. Their entire ecosystem of superiority and entitlement had collapsed under the weight of hard, indisputable evidence. And I had not even had to raise my voice. I had simply provided the truth and let the system process their lies. I ordered another sparkling water, leaned back in my lounge chair, and finally began to read the book I had downloaded on the flight over. The storm in Atlanta was raging, but my sky was perfectly clear. I pressed down on the trackpad and watched the email disappear into the digital ether securely on its way to the chief executive officer of Vanguard Capital, along with the 60-page dossier of Preston financial crimes. There was no turning back now. I closed the email application and took a slow breath of the warm tropical air flowing through the open glass doors of my bungalow. The gentle sound of the turquoise water lapping against the wooden stilts of my deck was a stark contrast to the absolute digital warfare I was currently engaged in. It took less than 2 hours for the shockwave to hit the mainland. My phone resting on the teakwood table vibrated with a new surge of activity in the family group chat. Kiara was typing frantically. The text bubbles appeared in rapid succession, filled with disjointed sentences and sheer unadulterated panic. She wrote that Preston corporate credit card had just been declined at the airport coffee kiosk. She said he called his executive assistant to fix the error, only to be transferred directly to the Human Resources Legal Compliance Department. Vanguard Capital did not just fire Preston. They locked him out of the entire corporate ecosystem while he was standing in the middle of a crowded airport terminal. Kiara sent a voice note, her voice cracking with hysterical sobs. She blamed me entirely. She screamed into the microphone saying that I had destroyed her husband's life, that I was a jealous monster tearing down a good provider because I could not find a man of my own to take care of me. My mother Beatrice quickly chimed in, sending paragraphs of text defending Preston. She called me a vindictive snake for ruining the only successful white-collar man in our family circle, entirely ignoring the fact that he was a criminal who stole money to fund his fake lifestyle. But it was my older brother Malik who made the most fatal error of the afternoon. Malik had always viewed himself as the ultimate patriarch of our generation, despite his constant quiet reliance on my bank account to stay afloat. He jumped into the chat to defend his white brother-in-law with a suffocating arrogance. Malik typed that at least Preston tried to provide for his family, unlike me, who only cared about myself and my lonely bank accounts. Malik proudly declared that he built his beautiful life with his own 2 hands and that his perfect family did not need my toxic energy anywhere near them. He told me that I was officially a disgrace to the Washington name. He typed the exact words that sealed his financial fate. He said, "We are cutting you out of our house and our lives forever. Do not ever contact us again." I stared at the phrase "our house" on the glowing screen of my phone. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. Malik and Haley loved to flaunt their massive 5-bedroom brick mansion in the exclusive Buckhead neighborhood. They hosted lavish dinner parties, giving house tours to Haley internet followers and bragging about the custom marble countertops and the resort-style backyard. Haley constantly posted videos talking about how hard they worked to purchase their dream home, painting Malik as an incredibly successful real estate investor who spoiled his wife. The reality of that Buckhead mansion was a carefully guarded secret that I had kept for 4 years out of a misplaced sense of sibling loyalty and pity. 4 years ago, Malik's credit score was completely destroyed. He had tried to flip a commercial property using high-interest loans and failed spectacularly, plunging his young family into massive, unrecoverable debt. They were weeks away from being evicted from a cramped apartment when Haley came to me crying and holding her newborn baby, begging for salvation. Against my better judgment, I stepped in to save them from ruin. I did not just give them money to rent a new place. I purchased that beautiful 5-bedroom Buckhead mansion entirely in cash through a blind limited liability company that I solely controlled. I drew up a highly discounted lease agreement, allowing Malik and Haley to live in a luxury estate for mere pennies compared to its actual market value, just so my niece and nephew would have a safe, upscale neighborhood to grow up in. I let them pretend they owned it outright. I let Malik stand at the head of the long dining table, like the king of a castle that my software company had quietly paid for. I swallowed my pride every time. Haley posted a video claiming they bought the house through manifestation and hard work, while my holding company silently paid the heavy property taxes and the expensive maintenance fees. I gave them the ultimate gift of dignity, and they repaid me by dumping their nieces and nephews on a freezing porch and telling me I was cut out of their house. Since Malik explicitly stated he wanted me out of his life and his house, I decided it was time to grant his wish with absolute legal precision. I opened a new tab on my browser and logged into the highly secure portal for the high-end property management firm that handled the daily operations of my real estate portfolio. The property manager assigned to the Buckhead house was a highly efficient woman named Sarah, who knew exactly who actually owned the estate. I drafted a formal email to her authorizing the immediate termination of the lease agreement for Malik and Haley Washington. I did not have to invent a reason to evict them. Haley had been handing me lease violations on a silver platter for years. The residential contract strictly prohibited running a commercial business out of the property without written consent and proper zoning permits. Haley had turned the entire finished basement into a commercial photography studio for her influencer brand, regularly having unauthorized vendors lighting crews and makeup artists in and out of the residential house. I had ignored it to keep the peace and let her play pretend, but today it was the perfect, indisputable grounds for a 30-day notice of eviction. I instructed Sarah to send the electronic notice immediately and to schedule a process server to tape the physical legal documents to their front door by tomorrow morning so the whole neighborhood could see it. I hit send on the eviction order and watched the confirmation pop up on my screen. Malik and Haley were currently stuck in a cheap budget motel near the Atlanta airport because they had missed their non-refundable luxury flight to Aspen while dealing with the fallout of the Ring camera footage. They were sitting in a cramped, dingy room surrounded by their expensive designer ski gear when the email from the property management company arrived in their inboxes. The timing was absolutely beautiful. I did not have to wait long to see the reaction. My phone vibrated with an incoming call from Malik. I watched his name flash across the screen, but I did not answer. He called again and again, his desperation mounting with each ring. Then the text messages started flooding in, completely contradicting his earlier declaration of masculine independence. He was no longer the arrogant patriarch talking down to his single sister. He was a panicked, terrified man who had just realized the floor had completely dropped out from under his carefully constructed fake reality. He sent a frantic message asking why the property management company was sending him an eviction notice and begging me to call the landlord to fix it before Haley had a total breakdown. He still believed I was just a generous co-signer on the lease who had a good relationship with the owner. He had no idea he was texting the actual landlord who held the deed to his entire life. I simply replied with a clean screenshot of the state property records, showing my holding company as the sole owner of the Buckhead estate, followed by a text that simply read, "You said you wanted me out of your house, so I am taking it back. You have 30 days to vacate my property." The psychological collapse of my older brother was swift and absolute. The family group chat went completely silent for several minutes as the reality of the screenshot set in. Kiara and Preston were dealing with federal embezzlement charges and sudden catastrophic unemployment in the middle of an airport terminal. Malik and Haley were facing imminent homelessness and the total destruction of their fake online wealth narrative inside a cheap motel room. The two golden couples of the Washington family, the ones my mother had constantly praised and elevated above me, were entirely ruined in the span of a few hours because they pushed the quiet sister too far. Haley sent a desperate text offering to pay market rent, begging me not to do this to her children. She entirely conveniently forgot that just hours ago, she was perfectly fine abandoning my other nieces and nephews on a frozen porch while laughing in a heated car. I did not respond to her pathetic pleas. I had provided them a luxury life for 4 years, and they used that stability to look down on me and treat me like trash. The grace period had officially expired, and the bill for their arrogance was finally due. While the reality of unemployment and eviction paralyzed my siblings, my mother, Beatrice, was experiencing a completely different type of crisis. She was still trapped in her small house in Atlanta, with 5 crying, hungry children driving her insane. Her entire holiday weekend at the casino was ruined, and her friends were probably wondering where she was. But more importantly, she was watching the perfect families she had always weaponized against me disintegrate in real time. Beatrice could not handle the loss of control. Her narcissism required a scapegoat to survive, and since I had effectively dismantled her golden children from thousands of miles away, she decided to escalate her retaliation to a terrifying and malicious level. She sent a text to the family group chat that made my blood run completely cold, despite the warm tropical sun beating down on my face. Beatrice declared that I was a monster who was trying to destroy the family, and that she was going to teach me a lesson about the law that I would never forget. She typed that since I loved using security cameras and police threats, she was going to show me how real consequences worked in the real world. She announced that she was currently packing all 5 traumatized children back into her car. She was not taking them to the airport to find their parents, or finding a hotel to calm them down. She stated she was driving them directly to the local police precinct. Her plan was horrifyingly vindictive and reckless. She intended to walk into the police station, drop the children in the crowded lobby, and formally report that I had forced her to abandon them. She was going to lie to law enforcement, claiming that I was dangerously unstable and attempting to frame me for child endangerment just to force me to fly back to Atlanta and submit to her control. I read my mother text message twice, just to make sure I was fully comprehending the sheer scale of her delusion. She was actually going to use the Atlanta Police Department as a customer service hotline to complain about her daughter setting a boundary. She was willing to drag 5 innocent, exhausted children into a police precinct on Christmas morning just to execute a petty revenge plot. She thought that bringing law enforcement into the situation would terrify me into submission. She believed that the threat of a criminal investigation would make me fly back to Atlanta, unlock my doors, give Malik his house back, and magically fix Preston embezzlement charges. It was a spectacular display of toxic maternal narcissism. She thought she controlled the narrative because she was physically present in the city while I was trapped on a tropical island. She had vastly underestimated the level of infrastructure I had put in place to protect my life and my empire. I did not panic. I did not call the police station crying and begging to explain myself. I opened my contacts and dialed a number I reserved for absolute emergencies. It rang twice before a smooth professional voice answered. It was Marcus Sterling, the senior partner at the most ruthless high-profile defense and corporate litigation firm in Atlanta. I kept Marcus on a very expensive monthly retainer for my software company, but his services extended to my personal protection as well. "Marcus," I said, my voice perfectly steady. Merry Christmas. I need you to go to the local precinct in my neighborhood immediately. My mother is currently in the lobby attempting to file a fraudulent police report claiming I committed child abandonment. She has my nieces and nephews with her. Marcus did not miss a beat. His tone remained crisp and analytical, completely unbothered by the fact that I was calling him on a major holiday. He asked if we had documented evidence to contradict her claims. I told him I had 4K security footage of her dumping the children on my porch and driving away. I told him I had time-stamped text messages of her admitting she left them there while I was on a flight. I told him I had messages of her attempting to extort $50,000 from me to make the situation disappear. I also told him I had footage of my brother and sister-in-law watching the abandonment happen from across the street. I uploaded the entire encrypted file to his secure server while we spoke. Excellent, Marcus said, and I could hear him grabbing his keys in the background. I will be at the precinct in 20 minutes. I will handle Beatrice and ensure no charges are filed against you. How aggressive do you want me to be with the countermeasures? I looked out at the brilliant blue water of the lagoon. My family had tried to use the justice system to destroy me. It was time they experienced the very real consequences of filing a false police report. Marcus, I said softly, I want you to be entirely legally ruthless. Show the desk sergeant the footage. Explain that my mother is attempting to weaponize the police department to cover up her own child endangerment. Do not hold back. I ended the call and leaned back in my lounge chair. I imagined the scene unfolding in the precinct lobby. Beatrice was likely standing at the front desk playing the role of the exhausted, worried grandmother. She was probably wiping fake tears from her eyes, painting me as the cruel, affluent spinster who hated children. She would tell the officers that I lured them to my house and then locked the doors, trapping the poor babies in the freezing cold. The children would be crying, sitting on uncomfortable plastic chairs, wrapped in their winter coats, traumatized by the constant shuffling and shouting of the adults who were supposed to protect them. My mother thought her performance would win over the sympathetic officers. She assumed her status as an older, respectable-looking woman would automatically validate her story. She had no idea a legal predator was currently speeding toward her location, armed with irrefutable video evidence. I ordered a fresh plate of tropical fruit and watched a small school of silver fish dart around the wooden pillars beneath my deck. I felt no guilt for what was about to happen to her. For decades, she had used guilt as a leash to keep me tied to her demands. She had conditioned me to believe that protecting the family reputation was more important than protecting my own peace. But respect is a two-way street, and the moment she decided to try and put me in handcuffs over her own reckless behavior, she revoked her privilege to call me her daughter. 45 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Marcus. The background noise was quiet, indicating he had stepped outside the precinct to speak with me privately. The situation has been neutralized, Zuri. He reported, his voice carrying a hint of dark amusement. I arrived just as your mother was filling out the formal written complaint with a detective. She was putting on quite the performance, sobbing about how you intentionally left the children to freeze. I intervened immediately, introducing myself as your legal counsel, and requested a private viewing of the evidence I brought before they proceeded with any warrants. I asked him exactly what happened when the police saw the truth. Marcus explained that he took the detective into a side office and played the security footage on his tablet. The detective watched your mother dumping the kids and driving away, Marcus said. He watched her completely ignore the youngest child crying in the snow. Then I showed him the wide-angle footage of your brother and his wife watching the entire scene from their warm vehicle. I had him read the extortion text demanding $50,000. Marcus paused, and I could hear the satisfaction in his breath. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly, Zuri. The detective was absolutely furious that his time was being wasted and that a grandmother would lie so brazenly to law enforcement. He marched right back out into the lobby. He informed your mother that not only were they declining to investigate you for any crime, but they were officially opening a criminal investigation into her. My mother was being charged with filing a false police report and reckless endangerment of a minor. The reality of the situation crashed down beautifully. What about the children? I asked, staring at the clear blue sky. That is where the situation escalated to a completely different level, Marcus continued. Because your mother abandoned the children in freezing temperatures, and the legal parents were documented, watching it happen from their vehicle before driving toward the airport, the police were legally obligated by state law to contact Child Protective Services. A state caseworker arrived 15 minutes ago. They are currently holding the children in protective custody in the station playroom. Your mother was detained for questioning and had her phone confiscated. They told her she is not leaving the station anytime soon. Haley and Kiara just received the call from the caseworker, Marcus added. They are absolutely hysterical. Haley and Malik are rushing over from their cheap motel, and Kiara and Preston are in a taxi coming from the airport. The Child Protective Services worker is currently preparing to interview all 4 parents to determine if the children are even safe to return to their custody, given the undeniable video evidence of severe neglect. The perfect families were about to have to beg the state to keep their own children, completely shattering their public images forever. I thanked Marcus for his exceptional work and told him to bill me double for the holiday hours. After we disconnected, I sat in the warm sunlight, letting the magnitude of the victory settle over me. Haley had spent her entire morning trying to ruin my reputation on the internet by playing the perfect victimized mother. Now she was going to have to walk into a police precinct and explain to a government social worker why she sat in a heated luxury vehicle and laughed while her own toddlers cried on an icy porch. She would have to explain why catching a flight to Aspen was more important than ensuring her kids were safely inside a house. If any of her followers ever found out that Child Protective Services had to be called to rescue her children, her lucrative career as a family influencer would be completely obliterated. No brand would ever sponsor a woman officially investigated for child neglect. She had built a house of cards, and I had just handed the police the fan to blow it all down. Preston was walking into an even worse nightmare. The arrogant finance bro who loved to belittle my business and boast about his superiority was currently unemployed, facing federal embezzlement charges, and now had to face a police detective regarding his abandoned children. He could no longer hide behind his tailored suits and corporate titles. He was going to be questioned in a sterile interrogation room stripped of all his unearned power. Kiara would have to sit beside a husband who had just ruined their entire financial future while simultaneously trying to prove she was a fit mother. The sheer humiliation they were about to endure was entirely of their own making. They had always looked down on me because I was single, assuming my life lacked value, because I did not have a husband or children to define my worth. Yet their marriages were currently imploding in the lobby of a police station while my solitary life was protecting me in a 5-star resort across the globe. My phone began to vibrate again. It was an incoming call from an unknown local Atlanta number. I deduced it was likely one of my siblings using a phone at the precinct, since they were probably instructed not to contact me directly by the police. I let it ring. They wanted me to save them. They wanted me to call the precinct and drop the camera footage or tell the social worker it was all a big misunderstanding. They expected the reliable, quiet sister to swoop in and absorb their consequences. I picked up the phone, swiped the screen, and blocked the number without answering. The sun was high in the sky now, reflecting off the crystal water in blinding flashes of light. I stood up from the teakwood table, stretched my arms, and decided it was the perfect time for a swim. The water was waiting, and my family was finally learning what happened when the doormat they stepped on for years suddenly vanished from beneath their feet. The warm salt water of the lagoon was the perfect temperature. I swam for nearly an hour, letting the physical exertion wash away any lingering traces of adrenaline from the morning corporate execution. The water was perfectly clear, allowing me to see the vibrant coral reefs and silver fish swimming directly beneath my private overwater villa. When I finally climbed back onto my wooden deck, wrapped myself in a plush white towel, and picked up my phone, the situation back in Atlanta had transitioned from a legal crisis into a localized domestic nightmare. The Atlanta Police Department and the state social workers must have finally released my relatives from the precinct lobby. They were not behind bars, but they were now confined to a prison of their own making. They had all retreated to my mother house to regroup. Beatrice lived in a modest, cramped three-bedroom property in a Midwestern-style suburb just outside the city perimeter. I could easily visualize the claustrophobic nightmare unfolding within those cheap drywall boundaries. 5 exhausted toddlers and elementary-aged children who had spent their entire Christmas morning crying in a sterile police station would be screaming, running through the small hallways, and demanding their holiday presents. Haley and Kiara would be utterly inconsolable, violently mourning the complete destruction of their carefully curated social media lives and the looming terrifying threat of the active Child Protective Services investigation. Malik would be pacing the worn carpet of the living room, panicking about his impending eviction from the luxury Buckhead mansion he pretended to own. And Preston, the arrogant finance executive who had always believed he was completely untouchable, would be having a total psychological collapse as the reality of his federal embezzlement charges and imminent prison sentence fully materialized in his mind. They desperately needed a target for their massive collective misery. Since they were pathologically incapable of taking accountability for their own disastrous choices, they aimed all their remaining explosive rage directly at me. The family group chat had become a digital war zone. My phone screen was a continuous waterfall of pure, unadulterated hatred. Malik sent threatening text messages saying he was going to fly to French Polynesia and physically drag me back to Atlanta to fix the financial mess I created. Kiara called me a barren witch who was deliberately trying to steal her children through the state foster system because I was empty and hollow inside. Beatrice left rapid-fire voice notes screaming that I had disgraced the Washington family name and that a vengeful God would punish me for disrespecting my elders on a holy day. They still genuinely believed they had the upper hand in the power dynamic. They still thought they could bully me into opening my wallet to repair the catastrophic damage they had inflicted upon themselves. I sat down on my teakwood lounge chair and watched the hateful notifications roll in, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold surgical detachment. Looking at their vicious words, my mind drifted back over the last decade of my life. I thought about the thousands of silent, invisible ways I had financially carried every single adult in that cramped house. When my mother constantly complained that her mortgage was too high for her modest salary, I did not just help her with a few monthly payments to ease the burden. I quietly wired the funds and paid off the entire remaining balance of her mortgage so she could live debt-free for the rest of her life. When Malik wanted to project the image of a highly successful real estate investor to impress Haley internet followers, I did not just buy the Buckhead mansion for him to live in at a massive discount. I also signed the commercial lease agreements and covered the monthly auto payments for both of his luxury Mercedes sport utility vehicles so he could look wealthy on the street. When Kiara and Preston first got married, and Preston claimed he was struggling to get his foot in the door at the elite finance firm, I put their entire household on my premium corporate cell phone plan and paid the exorbitant bill every single month without ever asking for a single dime in return. I had secretly funded their luxury lives for years, acting as the invisible financial pillar holding up their extremely fragile egos. And how did they repay my quiet generosity over the years? They mocked me relentlessly. I vividly remembered sitting in my mother's living room 3 years ago during a Thanksgiving dinner, listening to Malik and Preston laugh, while drinking the expensive imported bourbon I had purchased for them. Malik had boldly called me the family sugar mama, making a crude joke about how it was a damn shame I had all that money, but no husband to properly manage it for me. Kiara had chimed in giggling, as she said that I only paid for their things because I was desperately trying to buy the love of her children, since I was clearly incapable of finding a man to give me my own. Beatrice had nodded in solemn agreement, telling the entire table that financial success meant absolutely nothing for a Black woman if she had an empty bed at night. They took my money, used it to elevate their own social status, and then stepped squarely on my neck to make themselves feel taller. They genuinely believed my wealth was an infinite natural resource that would flow unconditionally, regardless of their abuse. It was time to teach them the final devastating lesson in basic economics. I opened the secure private banking application on my laptop. The interface was sleek and minimalist, displaying the various checking and corporate accounts I used to manage my daily operational expenses. I navigated to the automated payments dashboard. It was a long list of direct debits that I had set up years ago and practically forgotten about. The first item on the list was the commercial financing agreement for Malik 2 Mercedes vehicles. He loved driving around Atlanta, acting like a real estate mogul, while my holding company automatically drafted the $2,000 monthly payment from my corporate account. I hovered the mouse over the cancellation button and clicked it. A security prompt asked me to confirm the immediate termination of the autopay mandate. I clicked confirm. The payment was officially stopped, and the finance company would automatically begin the vehicle repossession process after the very next missed billing cycle. Malik would be walking to work by the end of January. I moved down the digital list to my mother accounts. Beatrice had been living rent-free because I paid off her house, but she still generated massive utility bills and property taxes that I quietly covered every quarter to keep her perfectly comfortable. I clicked the cancellation button for her electric bill. I clicked the cancellation button for her water bill. I deleted the autopay for her gas heating bill. I liquidated the property tax escrow account, returning the substantial balance to my primary checking account. I hit confirm on every single prompt. She was now entirely responsible for the crushing financial weight of her own life. Finally, I scrolled down to the premium corporate cellular plan that connected the entire family to the digital world. I was paying for unlimited ultra-wideband data, international roaming, and annual device upgrades for Malik, Haley, Kiara, Preston, and Beatrice. I clicked the master cancellation switch, completely terminating the service for all 5 secondary lines effective immediately. I closed the banking portal and looked back at my phone resting on the glass table. The family group chat, which had been exploding with incoming hostile messages every 3 seconds, suddenly stopped completely. The digital silence was immediate and profound. I refreshed the screen, but no new messages appeared. Their cell service had been entirely cut off. They were currently sitting in a cramped, noisy house with no active data plans, no way to call their friends to complain, and absolutely no way to continue harassing me over text messages. They were entirely digitally isolated from the outside world. I smiled, picked up my sparkling water, and closed my eyes, letting the tropical sun warm my skin. An hour passed in perfect, luxurious tranquility. I ordered a light lunch of grilled fish and read a few chapters of a novel, enjoying the absolute freedom of having finally excised a massive cancerous tumor from my life. But the beautiful silence was eventually broken by a soft ping from my laptop speakers. It was not a text message, since their phones were dead. It was an email arriving in my private personal inbox. I opened the browser and looked at the sender information. It was from an unfamiliar generic webmail account that had likely been created just moments ago. But the subject line told me exactly who it was from. The subject simply read, "You are dead to me." I clicked the email and began to read. It was from Preston. He must have connected his laptop to my mother, terrible home wireless network, to bypass the cellular blackout and send the message. Preston was backed into a corner, completely stripped of his corporate identity, his stolen wealth, and his unearned power. He was facing federal prison time, and his marriage was likely disintegrating under the weight of the Child Protective Services investigation. In his absolute desperation, he dropped his polite corporate finance bro facade entirely. He sent a massive, unhinged email directly to me, but in his blind, furious rage, he had made a fatal technological error. He had clicked reply all on an old family email thread regarding a past holiday dinner, accidentally copying Beatrice, Malik, Kiara, and Haley on his message. The email was a disgusting, vile display of unfiltered racism and white superiority. Preston blamed my kind for his total downfall. He explicitly used racial slurs, calling our family a bunch of low-class ghetto trash who dragged his pristine reputation down to our level. He wrote that he was a victim of reverse discrimination, and that a bitter, arrogant black woman like me had no right to destroy a brilliant white man career. He stated that he only tolerated our family gatherings because my money made it convenient, but he always felt physically sick having to eat at the same table as us. He told Kiara directly in the text of the email that he regretted ever marrying into a family of uneducated leeches, and that he was leaving her to deal with the Child Protective Services investigation entirely on her own because he refused to be associated with our dirty bloodline. He completely exposed his deep-seated hatred and disgust for the very black family he had been financially bleeding dry for years, and he just sent it directly to all of their inboxes while they were sitting in the exact same room with him. The digital delivery of that email acted as a localized explosive device right in the middle of my mother-cramped suburban living room. I could picture the exact sequence of events unfolding with absolute cinematic clarity. Preston had been pacing the worn carpet, his face red with manic desperation, typing furiously on his laptop while connected to the slow residential wireless network. Kiara Malik, Haley and Beatrice were all sitting on the cheap furniture, staring at their respective disconnected smartphones, trying to figure out why their cellular service had suddenly vanished. The only devices receiving external data were the ones connected to the local network. When Preston slammed his finger down on the enter key, sending his vile racist manifesto into the digital ether, the notification chimes echoed simultaneously across 4 different devices in that tiny room. Kiara opened the email first. My younger sister had spent her entire adult life worshipping the ground Preston walked on. She had alienated her own blackness and her own family just to conform to his rigid, oppressive standards of white suburban perfection. She had proudly paraded him around at family gatherings, treating his finance career as her personal shield against the world. She believed he was her perfect white knight who had elevated her above her roots. As she read the words glowing on her screen, that entire illusion shattered into a million jagged pieces. She read his blatant use of racial slurs. She read his disgust for her bloodline. She read his explicit declaration that he regretted marrying into a family of uneducated leeches and that he was abandoning her to face Child Protective Services completely alone because she was beneath him. The suffocating silence in the living room was broken by a single gut-wrenching sob from Kiara. She dropped her tablet onto the floor and looked at the man she had sworn to love and cherish. Preston realized his fatal error the moment he saw the look of absolute devastation and rising terror on his wife's face. He looked down at his own screen and saw the reply all distribution list. The arrogant finance executive who always claimed to be the smartest person in any room had accidentally broadcast his deepest racial hatred directly to his black wife and her entire black family. He tried to backpedal immediately. He stammered and stuttered, holding his hands up in a pathetic defensive gesture, claiming that he was just stressed, that he was not thinking clearly, that the words did not mean what they sounded like. But it was too late. The truth was written in plain, unalterable text. Malik stood up from the sofa, his physical presence immediately dominating the small space. For all of his terrible qualities, Malik still possessed a deep-seated protective instinct when it came to overt racial disrespect. He stepped toward Preston, closing the distance between them with a terrifying speed. Preston, the man who had just typed a courageous manifesto about his inherent racial superiority, physically cowered away from my brother. Malik demanded to know if Preston actually meant the disgusting slurs he had just used to describe their family. Preston, trembling and suddenly completely devoid of his corporate bravado, tried to blame the entire situation on me. He pointed his finger at the laptop, screaming that none of this would have happened if I had just given him the $50,000 he demanded. He tried to argue that my refusal to be extorted had pushed him to a mental breaking point and that I was the real villain. But nobody was buying his pathetic deflections anymore. Kiara lunged at him, screaming and pounding her fists against his chest, demanding to know where all their money had gone. In the midst of his panicked defense, Preston accidentally revealed the truth about his sudden unemployment. He screamed that his accounts were frozen, that the federal government was investigating him for embezzlement, and that Vanguard Capital had fired him an hour ago. He yelled that they were completely broke and that he was facing years in prison. The revelation hit Kiara like a physical blow. Her perfect wealthy husband was a broke criminal who despised her very existence. The living room erupted into an absolute blowout fight of catastrophic proportions. The underlying racial and class tensions that had simmered beneath the surface of our family dynamics for a decade finally boiled over and exploded. Haley jumped in to defend Preston, not out of loyalty, but out of a desperate need to align herself with the only other white person in the room. Haley turned her vicious attention directly toward my mother. The fake mommy influencer dropped her sweet Southern belle persona entirely and verbally decimated Beatrice. She screamed that Beatrice was a terrible mother who raised a generation of failures. She blamed my mother for coddling Malik and turning him into an incompetent man who could not even afford his own luxury lifestyle. She shrieked that the entire Washington family was a toxic swamp and that she should have never married into such a pathetic bloodline. Malik turned his rage toward his wife, demanding she show some respect to the woman who raised him. But Preston, seeing an opportunity to deflect the anger away from his own racism, joined forces with Haley. Preston laughed right in Malik's face, pointing out the absolute hypocrisy of his pride. Preston screamed that Malik was a total failure playing dress-up in a Buckhead mansion he did not even own. Preston brutally reminded my brother that he could not even afford the payments on his precious Mercedes vehicles and that he was nothing more than a broke tenant begging for handouts from his sister. The perfect family illusion was dead. They were tearing each other apart with the exact same viciousness they usually reserved for me. The chaos inside the house was suddenly interrupted by a loud mechanical noise coming from the street outside. A heavy diesel engine rumbled through the quiet suburban neighborhood, followed by the distinct sound of hydraulic lifts engaging. Malik froze and ran to the front window, pulling back the cheap vertical blinds. Parked directly in front of my mother's house was a massive commercial tow truck. The driver was already securing heavy metal chains to the front axle of Malik's primary luxury sport utility vehicle. Because I had canceled the automated financing payments through my corporate account, the auto lender had immediately flagged the vehicles for recovery. Since Malik had missed the prior month payment and I had pulled the safety net, the bank did not waste a single second. They tracked the GPS signal of the vehicle straight to my mother's driveway. Malik ran out the front door into the freezing winter air, screaming at the tow truck driver to stop. He grabbed the metal chains, demanding they unhook his car, claiming there had been a banking error. The driver, a large, unbothered man in a high-visibility jacket, simply handed Malik a formal repossession notice and told him to step away from the machinery or the police would be called. The humiliation was absolute. The neighbors, who had already witnessed the children crying on the porch and the police cruisers arriving earlier that morning, were now standing in their yards, watching Malik's prestigious luxury car being hauled away like garbage. Haley stood in the doorway, watching her fake wealthy lifestyle literally driving down the street attached to a tow hook. She burst into hysterical tears, dropping to her knees on the frozen concrete, realizing that she was completely ruined. Preston used the distraction of the repossession to make his cowardly escape. While Malik was fighting with the tow truck driver, Preston grabbed his expensive leather overnight bag and walked right out the back door of my mother's house. He left his 3 traumatized children sitting in the chaotic living room. He left his wife crying on the floor. He walked down the alleyway toward a main road to hail a taxi, abandoning the family he had just viciously insulted. He declared he was filing for divorce to protect whatever non-existent assets he had left, and simply vanished into the freezing afternoon, leaving a trail of absolute devastation in his wake. Beatrice stood in the center of her living room, surrounded by the wreckage of her entire universe. The 2 marriages she had constantly praised and elevated above my single life were completely destroyed. Her golden son was humiliated and broke. Her precious white son-in-law was a fugitive racist who had abandoned his family. The Buckhead mansion was gone. The luxury cars were gone. The cell phones were dead. The money had stopped flowing. She looked at the crying children, the screaming adults, and the sheer suffocating misery filling her home. The realization hit her with the force of a freight train. I was the only pillar that had ever held this family together. My patience and my quiet endurance were the only things keeping them from drowning in their own incompetence. By pushing me away, they had kicked out the very foundation of their lives. My mother had no cell service to call me. Her internet connection was unstable, and she knew I would not answer a generic email. She needed to hear my voice. She needed to perform her ultimate manipulation tactic, but she had no tools left to execute it. Completely desperate, Beatrice put on her winter coat and walked out of her house. She walked down the icy sidewalk to her next-door neighbor's house. a kind elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson, who had lived there for 20 years. Beatrice knocked on the door, weeping uncontrollably, and begged to borrow her landline telephone for a medical emergency. Mrs. Henderson took pity on the crying woman and handed her the cordless phone. I was sitting on the wooden deck of my overwater bungalow, watching the sky slowly transition into a breathtaking tapestry of twilight colors when my phone began to vibrate. The caller identification showed a landline number from my mother's neighborhood in Atlanta. I knew exactly what was happening. I let it ring 4 times, letting the tension stretch to its absolute limit before I finally swiped the screen and brought the device to my ear. I did not say hello. I just listened to the heavy, ragged breathing on the other end of the line. Zuri! My mother sobbed, her voice cracking under the weight of genuine, utter despair. Please, Zuri, please answer me. It is Mom. I am calling from the neighbor house. I took a slow sip of my ice water, feeling the cool condensation on the glass. I am here, Beatrice, I replied, my voice stripped of all emotion, completely flat and clinical. She broke down completely, wailing into the receiver with a pathetic desperation I had never heard from her before. We are sorry, she cried, her words stumbling over each other in a frantic rush. We are so sorry, Zuri. Please, you have to help us. We have absolutely nothing left. They just towed Malik cars away from the driveway. Haley is having a nervous breakdown on the floor. Preston packed his bags and walked out the back door. He left Kiara and the babies. He sent that awful email and he just left. Please, Zuri, we are begging you. You are the only one who can fix this. Please save us. I listened to the woman who had spent my entire life calling me a failure and a disappointment, beg me to act as her savior. She was not apologizing for her behavior. She was apologizing because she was experiencing the consequences of it. She wanted the ATM to dispense cash, and she was willing to cry to make it happen. She wanted me to wave a magic wand, restore the luxury vehicles, pay off the debts, and magically stitch together a family that despised me. She thought her tears would reactivate my conditioned response to serve them. I did not immediately say no. I let the silence hang over the thousands of miles of ocean separating us. I let her sit in the terrifying quiet of the unknown. My mind was executing the final strategic moves of a flawless victory. I was not going to give them a single dime. I was not going to fix their marriages or restore their reputations. But I was going to give them the opportunity to look me in the eyes when I delivered the final verdict. I wanted to see their faces when they realized the exact magnitude of what they had lost. Go back to your house, Beatrice, I said, my voice perfectly calm and commanding. Gather Malik, Haley, and Kiara in the living room. I am going to send an email to your laptop with a secure video conference link. If you want my help, you will all be sitting in front of that camera in exactly 10 minutes. Thank you. She wept, her relief palpable through the phone line. Thank you, Zuri. We will be there. We will do whatever you say. I ended the call and set the phone down. I opened my laptop and generated a secure encrypted meeting link. I sent it to her email address and positioned my computer screen to perfectly capture the stunning view of the Bora Bora sunset behind me. I adjusted the lighting, ensuring my image was crisp and radiant. I was not just preparing for a conversation, I was preparing to deliver a corporate execution wrapped in a family meeting. I sat back, folded my hands, and waited for the attendees to join the digital room, preparing to close the book on my family forever. I closed my laptop and handed it to the private concierge who was waiting patiently at the edge of my overwater deck. It was time to change the scenery for the final execution. I had chartered a private luxury yacht for the late afternoon, and it was currently anchored just a few yards away in the deep turquoise water of the lagoon. I stepped onto the pristine white deck of the vessel, feeling the gentle rocking motion of the ocean beneath my bare feet. The resort crew had already set up a beautiful outdoor lounge area, complete with plush white cushions and a chilled bottle of vintage champagne resting in a silver ice bucket. I asked the captain to position the yacht so the camera lens would capture the absolute perfect angle of the glowing tropical sunset and the iconic silhouette of Mount Otomanu in the background. I wanted my family to see exactly what peace and unbothered wealth looked like. I wanted the visual contrast between my paradise and their freezing, chaotic hell to be absolutely undeniable. I opened my laptop again, rested it on the polished mahogany table, and watched the digital waiting room of the secure video conference link. It did not take long for them to join. When the screen finally connected and the video feed from Atlanta populated my display, the image was almost pathetic enough to evoke pity if I had any left to give. My mother had positioned her laptop on her cheap coffee table. The camera angle was pointed slightly upward, capturing the cramped, depressing reality of her living room. The 5 children were huddled in the background, wrapped in winter coats because my mother apparently could not afford to keep the central heating running at a comfortable temperature now that I had liquidated her utility accounts. Malik sat on the sagging sofa looking absolutely unrecognizable. The arrogant real estate mogul who loved to flaunt his fake wealth was wearing a wrinkled hooded sweatshirt, his eyes red and swollen from crying over his repossessed vehicles. Haley was sitting on the floor next to him, completely stripped of her glamorous influencer persona. Her blonde hair was a greasy, tangled mess, and she was staring blankly at the floor, completely broken by the reality of her impending homelessness and the active Child Protective Services investigation. Kiara was shaking uncontrollably, clutching a throw pillow to her chest, her face stained with streaks of running mascara. And sitting right in the center was Beatrice, looking small and terrified. Beatrice spoke first. She tried to force a warm maternal smile, but her facial muscles were trembling so badly it looked like a grimace. She begged me to please speak to them. She said she was so glad I was safe and that the family was just worried about my well-being. The absolute delusion it took to pretend she was worried about me after dragging 5 children to a police precinct to have me falsely arrested was staggering. I did not say a word. I just sat there on the deck of my yacht, the tropical wind gently blowing my hair, taking a slow sip of my champagne. My silence forced them to abandon the pleasantries and get straight to the desperate begging. Kiara leaned into the camera frame, sobbing so violently she could barely form coherent sentences. She begged me to fix the situation with Vanguard Capital. She said Preston had packed a bag and left her completely alone to deal with the social workers. She cried that he called her disgusting racial slurs and that he blamed our entire family for his ruined life. She pleaded with me to just email his chief executive officer and tell them it was all a big misunderstanding. She actually had the audacity to ask me to lie to federal investigators to save a white man who had just openly degraded her blackness and abandoned her children. She said if I just gave him his job back, he would come home and her family would be whole again. She told me I had the power to save her marriage and that as her sister it was my duty to protect her. I looked at my younger sister, feeling a profound sense of disgust. She was so deeply colonized by her own internalized hatred that she was begging me to rescue her racist abuser. Then Malik pushed his way toward the microphone. The man who had texted me just hours ago telling me I was a vindictive snake and a disgrace to the Washington name was now literally begging for his financial life. He apologized for everything he had ever said to me. He told me he was just stressed, and that he did not mean any of the cruel insults he had hurled at me over the past decade. He begged me to cancel the eviction notice for the Buckhead mansion. He said Haley was threatening to leave him and take the kids back to her parents' house if they ended up on the street. He pleaded with me to call the auto lender and restore the payments on his luxury vehicles so he could have some dignity left. He said he was the man of the house and that I was castrating him in front of his wife. He asked me how I could be so cold to my own flesh and blood. Beatrice started wailing loudly, drowning out the pathetic apologies of my brother. She cried out, asking why her family was being tested like this. She looked directly into the camera and played the ultimate manipulation card. She said, "We are family Zuri and family forgives." She told me that no matter what happened, blood is thicker than water, and that I needed to come home and fix this broken family. She said she had nothing left, that her utilities were going to be shut off, and that she could not afford to feed 5 extra mouths on her own. She begged me to restore her bank accounts, and to be the good, obedient daughter she raised me to be. She promised that if I just turned the money back on, they would respect me forever and never ask for anything else. I let them cry and beg and plead for a full 5 minutes. I let them exhaust their emotional ammunition until the living room was just filled with the pathetic sounds of their heavy breathing and the distant crying of the children. Then I finally spoke. My voice was quiet, but it carried through the laptop speakers with the devastating force of a sledgehammer. I told them to listen to me very carefully because I was only going to say this once. I looked directly at the camera lens, establishing absolute unwavering eye contact with the people who had tormented me for my entire adult life. I told them that they did not love me. I told them they had never loved me. I said they only loved what I provided for them. I reminded them of every single time they had called my life meaningless because I did not have a husband to validate my existence. I pointed out the hilarious irony of their current situation. I looked at Kiara and told her that her perfect white husband was a criminal who despised her very skin color and that he was currently running from federal authorities because he was a complete fraud. I looked at Malik and told him that his entire masculine identity was a complete fabrication entirely funded by the single sister he constantly degraded. I told him that he was not a provider but a parasite who played dress-up in a house I owned. I looked at Beatrice and told her that she was a toxic enabler who worshipped the illusion of marriage so much that she sacrificed her only successful child to maintain the fake reputations of her two miserable married children. I continued dissecting their hypocrisy piece by piece, leaving them absolutely nowhere to hide. I reminded them that they had called me a failure, a lonely spinster, and a bitter woman. Yet my money paid for the roof over their heads. My money paid for the cars they drove, and my money paid for the phones they used to insult me. I told them that they believed they were superior to me simply because they had managed to secure wedding rings, while remaining entirely blind to the fact that their marriages were built on lies, debt, and extreme emotional abuse. I told them that they did not see me as a human being, but as a silent automatic teller machine that they could kick whenever they felt insecure about their own pathetic lives. I told them that the grace period was officially over and the bank was permanently closed. I watched the brutal reality wash over their features. The horror on their faces was absolute. They realized in that moment that no amount of crying, pleading, or manipulating was going to work. The emotional well was completely dry and the financial well had been filled with concrete. I reached down to the polished mahogany table next to my laptop and picked up a thick stack of legal documents. I held the papers up to the camera so they could clearly see the official state seals and the signature of my corporate attorney, Marcus Sterling. I told them that these were permanent restraining orders and formal cease and desist mandates. I explained that my legal team had already filed them with the court in Atlanta. I told them that if any of them ever attempted to contact me again, if they ever showed up at my corporate office, or if they ever tried to approach my private residence, they would be immediately arrested for violating a judicial order. I explained that my lawyer had compiled every single threatening text message, every instance of extortion, and the official police report from Christmas morning to ensure a judge would grant the maximum level of protection. Beatrice began to scream, slapping her hands against her coffee table, begging me not to abandon them. She cried that they would not survive without me, and that she was sorry for everything she had ever done. Kiara fell completely to the floor, disappearing from the camera frame as her sobbing turned into hyperventilation. Malik just sat there, staring blankly ahead, completely paralyzed by his impending ruin. Haley covered her face with her hands, unable to look at the screen. I looked at their miserable, fractured existence one last time. I felt no pity. I felt no sorrow. I felt no lingering sense of familial obligation. I felt nothing but the warm sun on my skin and the brilliant, limitless future stretching out before me. I leaned closer to the microphone and delivered my final sentence. I am not fixing anything. I whispered, my voice as cold as ice. You are all cut off forever. I moved my mouse over the red button on the screen and clicked end meeting, severing the connection and plunging their world into absolute permanent darkness. 6 months passed since that day on the yacht in the South Pacific. The transition from winter to summer brought a physical and metaphorical thaw to my existence while plunging my former relatives into a permanent ice age of their own making. The silence that followed my final video conference was not just the absence of noise. It was the heavy, suffocating quiet of a structural collapse. They had spent their entire lives treating my boundaries as suggestions and my bank accounts as public utilities. When the concrete finally dried over the well, they were forced to confront the terrifying reality of their own reflection. Society always expects the successful single black woman to pour her hard-earned resources back into a bottomless pit of familial dysfunction, to sacrifice her own peace to maintain the illusion of a happy family. They had expected me to be the typical mule carrying the weight of everyone else. Mistakes on my shoulders just because we shared the same last name. When I refused to play that role, their entire ecosystem imploded. Preston faced the absolute full wrath of the federal government and the corporate legal system. I received regular detailed updates from Marcus regarding the criminal proceedings. Preston tried to use his usual arrogant charm in the courtroom, attempting to charm the federal judge and play the victim of a corporate misunderstanding. But the judge was completely immune to his white corporate privilege. The embezzlement was so blatant, and the paper trail I provided was so meticulously organized that his high-priced defense attorneys eventually dropped his case when his frozen accounts meant he could no longer pay their exorbitant retainer fees. He was forced to swallow his pride and rely on an overworked public defender. He managed to avoid a lengthy federal prison sentence only by accepting a devastating plea deal that required absolute financial restitution and a permanent felony record. The man who once mocked my software company as a cute little coding hobby for women was now working 50 hours a week at a discount home improvement store. He spent his days taking inventory, unloading heavy boxes from delivery trucks, and sweeping concrete floors just to meet his court-ordered monthly payments. His custom-tailored Italian suits were replaced by a stiff, scratchy polyester uniform shirt with a plastic name tag. His limitless corporate expense card was replaced by a minimum-wage paper paycheck. He had to take direct orders from managers he would have previously crossed the street to avoid looking at. His entire identity of racial and financial superiority was ground into dust under the heel of the justice system he thought he controlled. Kiara had nowhere else to go when the illusion of her perfect marriage shattered. When Preston abandoned her to save himself, she was forced to pack all her belongings into black garbage bags and move her 3 traumatized children back into our mother-cramped suburban house. The same house where Beatrice had previously ruled as a comfortable, relaxed matriarch was now a claustrophobic nightmare of screaming children and mounting resentment. Without my invisible financial support, automatically covering the property taxes and the expensive utility bills, the crushing weight of basic survival crashed down on Beatrice. She was 58 years old and had not worked a real job in over a decade, preferring to live off my silent generosity while criticizing my life choices to anyone who would listen. Now she was forced to accept a position as a retail greeter at a massive chain superstore just to keep the electricity flowing and feed her 5 sudden dependents. She spent 8 hours a day standing on her swollen feet on hard linoleum floors, checking receipts and forcing a polite, subservient smile for strangers. The humiliation was absolute. Occasionally, she would have to greet people from her old church or social circles, the very same people she used to brag to about her wealthy, successful son and her elite son-in-law. Every time her aching legs throbbed and her back cramped, she was brutally reminded of the comfortable debt-free life she threw away just to protect her own toxic pride. She spent her evenings in a noisy, messy house rationing cheap groceries and listening to Kiara cry about a man who hated their very existence. Malik and Haley experienced perhaps the most spectacular and public humiliation of them all. The 30-day eviction notice from the Buckhead mansion was executed with absolute legal precision by my property management firm. They tried to fight it, but they had absolutely zero legal standing against a holding company with unlimited resources. They were forced to move into a tiny 2-bedroom apartment in a noisy, overcrowded complex right next to a busy, elevated highway. The thin walls offered no protection from the sounds of their neighbors or the constant roar of traffic. Haley desperately tried to salvage her lucrative career as a mommy influencer. She attempted to post a heavily edited video claiming they had willingly decided to downsize to embrace a minimalist, authentic lifestyle for the sake of their children. But the internet never forgets, and the digital world is completely ruthless. A neighbor from my mother's street had recorded the entire incident on Christmas morning. The video of the police cruisers, the child protective services workers, and the screaming abandoned children had been quietly uploaded to a local community forum, and it quickly went viral across all major social media platforms. The digital mob that Haley had tried to weaponize against me turned on her with terrifying speed. Every single brand sponsor dropped her immediately. Her comment sections were flooded with thousands of people calling her a neglectful fraud and demanding she be removed from the platform. Her online empire evaporated overnight, leaving her completely irrelevant, unemployable, and financially ruined. Malik lost his entire identity when the tow trucks took away his luxury vehicles. The arrogant patriarch who loved to brag about his self-made success and demand submission from his single sister was now a ghost of a man. Without the prop of a massive mansion and expensive cars, to hide behind his true incompetence was visible to the entire world. He was forced to take a mid-level sales job in a dying industry just to pay the rent on their miserable apartment. Because they had no credit and no savings, Malik had to rely on public transportation. Every morning, the man who called me a disgrace to the family name stood shivering at a bus stop, waiting to take a crowded city bus to a job he hated, staring out the smudged window at the life he used to pretend he owned. They were trapped together in a tiny space, blaming each other for a downfall that was entirely their own fault. As for me, I returned to Atlanta from the South Pacific, but I did not return to the house where they had dumped the children. That property held too many memories of their entitlement. I sold that house to a corporate commercial developer for a massive cash profit and upgraded my own reality. I purchased a sprawling multi-million-dollar penthouse in the heart of the city, featuring massive floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the entire Atlanta skyline. The space was vast and airy, filled with lush green plants, curated modern art, and the absolute undeniable peace of a woman who had finally excised a terminal disease from her life. Tonight, the penthouse was filled with the sounds of genuine laughter, the clinking of crystal glasses, and the rich aroma of a private chef preparing an elaborate 5-course meal in my gourmet kitchen. The private chef brought out platters of seared sea bass, roasted root vegetables, and perfectly seasoned Wagyu beef. The air smelled of truffles and fresh herbs. I was hosting a dinner party for my chosen family. Marcus was there sitting relaxed on a curved velvet sofa, sharing a drink and a story with my lead software developers and my chief operating officer. These were the people who respected my mind, who valued my time, and who celebrated my immense success without a single ounce of jealousy or toxic entitlement. They did not care if I had a husband or if I fit into a traditional mold. They did not view my single status as a character flaw or an open invitation to exploit my resources. They loved me for exactly who I was. They showed up for me when it mattered, and I showed up for them. The energy in the room was warm, vibrant, and completely devoid of the heavy, suffocating anxiety that used to define every single interaction I had with my biological relatives. I stood near the edge of my massive private balcony, looking out over the glittering, endless lights of the city below. The warm southern summer breeze caught the edge of my emerald green silk evening gown, making it flutter gently around my ankles. I held a crystal flute of expensive vintage champagne in my hand, feeling the cool condensation against my warm skin. I listened to the music drifting out from the living room, mingling with the sounds of the bustling city far below. I thought about the vicious words my mother had screamed at me on that freezing Christmas morning. She told me I had no real life because I chose not to conform to her miserable standards of existence. She actually believed that suffering through a toxic marriage, drowning in consumer debt, and tolerating blatant disrespect was somehow superior to building an empire in absolute peace. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my champagne, letting the crisp, bright bubbles dance across my tongue. The truth was so incredibly simple, and yet it took me over 3 decades to finally understand it. Blood does not make a family. Blood is just a biological accident, a random sequence of genetics that dictates nothing about loyalty, respect, or love. My real life did not end when I cut my biological family off and left them to face their own disastrous consequences. My real life actually began The exact moment I clicked that red button on my laptop and plunged their parasitic world into absolute permanent darkness. I had shed a tremendous amount of toxic weight, and in return, I had gained the entire world. I turned away from the sprawling city lights and looked back inside my beautiful, peaceful home, watching my real family raise their glasses in a joyous toast to my continued success. I smiled, taking another slow sip of my drink. I was completely unbothered, completely free, and absolutely untouchable. The glittering lights of the city faded into the soft background as I walked back into the warmth of my own perfect creation, leaving the ghosts of my past entirely in the dark. The most profound lesson from this story is that shared biology does not automatically entitle anyone to your peace, your resources, or your sanity. For years, enduring toxic family dynamics was disguised as loyalty, while generosity was routinely met with ungratefulness and cruel entitlement. True liberation begins the exact moment you stop seeking validation from people who are committed to misunderstanding your worth. Setting absolute and unbreakable boundaries is never an act of malice. Rather, it is the ultimate act of personal protection. You owe absolutely nothing to those who only value you for what they can aggressively extract today. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and share your own experiences with setting firm family boundaries in the comments below.